had some martinis together. And he and I became friends, and out of that friendship came this book, War in Heaven, that actually Craig mostly wrote, I have to be honest, but they put my name on it because I was quite well known, but his name should be first. And so this is really Craig's work, and he's the dearest, sweetest, funniest, he's just a gorgeous friend. And so I want to honour Craig very sincerely and deeply from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jocelyn. I'm an intern at the Project for Nuclear Awareness. I'm graduating this May from St. Joseph's University with a degree in political science. I was born 1 month after the fall of the Berlin Wall, so I don't know what it's like. I did not live through the Cold War, but that doesn't mean that I don't know what it feels like to live in fear of nuclear destruction. It concerns me to say that some members of my generation consider nuclear proliferation to be an outdated issue, but the tens of thousands of nuclear weapons that exist today present a viable threat to the future of our species and our fragile planet. Whether we strive to keep nuclear weapons out of the hands of terrorists, or strive to lessen the number that our own country possesses, or even simply feel that the presence of nuclear weapons on our planet violates our human rights, we can all agree that this issue is far from outdated. I work for the Project for Nuclear Awareness because I want to increase awareness and understanding of this highly relevant issue, which is too often pushed aside in political agendas and in the minds of people of all ages. Today, I ask you to recommit yourselves to promoting this important cause. If you want to talk more about this issue, I and the rest of the PNA staff are here tonight and would be happy to discuss with you the next steps you can take in raising awareness. An easy one, of course, is to support the Project for Nuclear Awareness by becoming a friend of PNA. There are envelopes on your tables, and there is a table outside where you can sign up. Now, if you want to talk about commitment to the issue of nuclear nonproliferation and disarmament, then you want to talk about a man named Craig Eisendrath. We are so fortunate to be in the presence of Craig and some of his family tonight. Craig's son is here to help us honor this man who has inspired so many young people like me. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Aaron Eisendrath.
Thank you. Good evening. It's wonderful to see so many people who are important to my father and have supported this work. I know he as well is so pleased to see you all here today. My father, Dr. Craig Eisendrath, asked me to say a few words on his behalf. As many of you know, he has trouble speaking due to his ALS. As chairman of the board of directors of PNA, my father is honored by this award given in his name. This work is so important to him. He has even arranged to be transported here for the ceremony despite a number of pleadings to the contrary due to his condition. I think his physical presence speaks to his commitment. For a few minutes before presenting the award, I'd like to speak to that commitment and the man behind it. When I was a child, my father explained how thrilled he was to be present at the first phone call by satellite. As an aside, I'm not sure which that call was, but if it was Telstar in 1962, that satellite ironically had a brief life, sadly, due to U.S. nuclear testing just before its launch. He has always been madly in love with life and its possibilities, whether these possibilities are in the sky or on the ground. He loves to show just how incredible life is. I remember sitting with him in the woods as an adult and his showing me that a little spider could weave a web and dangle there in its own creation, surrounded by a far larger creation. I think our possibilities as a human race held even more awe and wonderment than that of the spider. He has also always been adamantly opposed to violence and bullying of all kinds. He used to tell me with glee about running his bicycle through a neo-Nazi demonstration in the 60s. Pictures of him meeting presidents could sometimes be found in storage, but a picture of him committing civil disobedience as an activist was almost always prominently displayed wherever he lived or worked. The fear that space would somehow be carved up, armed to the teeth, as he put it, and used for violence fueled an intense and lifelong interest in nuclear disarmament. The human race was for the first time weaving its own web in the heavens. What would happen with that web of its own creation, surrounded by the unfathomably larger web of creation overall, was in the balance? Would it be used for scientific advancement and communication that potentially could foster peace? Or would it be used for armament and the destruction at lower levels, at land and sea, at air? This question first stirred him in his 20s. It was then that he worked on early outer space nuclear non-proliferation treaties of the 1960s at the United Nations. This was arguably the first time he worked on material that mattered to him in world affairs and began a lifelong path of activism. The roots, however, of that activism can be found earlier. Born in 1936, my father grew up surrounded by the tales of the horrors of that great and costly war of his youth, and that war shaped a mentality attuned to the large-scale dangers facing humanity. My father also had the influence of his parents. My paternal grandmother was involved in labor organizing and dismantling of neighborhood racial segregation in my father's birthplace of Chicago. She helped to develop an interest in the promotion of the good through activism. My paternal grandfather also pushed him along, alibi in ways not necessarily to my father's liking, but that nonetheless eventually led him later to start his work life with government service. My father graduated from the University of Chicago at the young age of 18, where he learned to think and love the larger questions of humanity through the study of the great books. He served peacefully in the Army for 2 years. He earned a PhD from Harvard and completed a master's degree at Georgetown in Foreign Affairs. He then entered the Foreign Service, one of the youngest officers. After 2 years as an assistant consul in Naples, he was hired at the UN and started working on what mattered to him. And what mattered to my father, other than his relationships and his joy of life, was largely twofold: a lifelong love of intellectualism and activism. What he enjoyed was quietly reading and writing in his study with his beloved cats at his feet, communicating through books with the great thinkers of times past. What he believed needed to be done was advocating for the ideals that mattered to him in the social order. He would tell me privately how he didn't prefer having to keep up with the minutiae of world affairs, who was assistant secretary of some smaller nation, for example, but that he needed to know such things. So he would rise early and study this minutiae, as well as work on material dearer to his heart. The knowledge of this detail was indispensable later in the day in radio interviews and discussions. His literary legacy demonstrates this dichotomy between intellectualism and activism. He has authored books on social subjects, for example, on nuclear nonproliferation, of course, in War in Heaven with Helen Caldicott, on the dysfunction of the U.S. intelligence community and national insecurity, which he edited and helped write with a variety of other authors, on politics and Bush League diplomacy, which he wrote with Melvin Goodman, but he also wrote books of intellectual history on topics ranging from the history of the ancients to quantum mechanics, most notably in Beyond Permanence. There's plays, a novel, even an opera libretto in the mix. It's not that he didn't take some enjoyment in writing, administrating, and speaking about the affairs of the world. He loved his many years as director of the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, helping to turn it into the largest state cultural organization. He took pleasure in co-founding the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia and working as a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy in Washington, as well as serving as the dean of a small college in Missouri, to name some of his positions. My father has always had a joie de vivre that has carried him through all periods of his life. He emphasized that the antidote to dissatisfaction in life was to delve into what mattered, whether you were doing it for love or ethics. But I've always admired his sacrifice to what he truly loved, the life of a scholar. He has been the man of the world, but his true love were the roots of activism and the dance of the little spider in its web. He would joke that he was excited by this novelty that these Phoenicians had come up with called clay tablets. I like to think that my father was a man who bridged those clay tablets and the great thinking of the past to the possibilities of a hyper-communicating world, and who tried to provide the stewardship that this world needed. Thank you for your care, Dad. You are much loved, and I think I speak for many in this room and afar. So before I get carried away with pride and love for my father, I'd like to introduce the recipient of this year's award, Kevin M. Krause. Somewhere out there. Kevin was picked from a group of highly qualified candidates because he best met the criteria of the inaugural Eisendrath Award for Youth Advocacy in Nuclear Disarmament. My father repeatedly has emphasized the importance of capable youth, and Kevin fits the criteria of the award excellently. By exhibiting a strong commitment to achieving a peaceful world free from the threat of nuclear weapons, he shares my father's vision of disarmed space, keeping the heavens for peaceful purposes and for the solace and wonder for which they have always provided, as my father put it. To start with some background, Kevin is a Juris Doctorate candidate at Widener, where he's also served as president of the International Law Society. He holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from Penn State, where he also served as president of the Student Government Association. I also understand he's an actor and has even climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. The award honors Kevin for his commitment to international peace and nuclear disarmament. It is being given in recognition of his work as the volunteer organizer of a highly successful event titled A Discussion on Nuclear Nonproliferation at Widener Law School, featuring Ambassador Thomas Graham and Professor Jonathan Granoff. Also as a project fellow for the International Court of Justice Jurisdiction Project, he developed new ways to increase the advisory jurisdiction of that court. Finally, the award honors Kevin's ongoing commitment to nuclear disarmament and international law issues, evident in his current research and upcoming work as a global law extern with the Global Security Institute and the Lawyers Committee for Nuclear Policy. He has an unabashed claim that he shares with my father to save the world, and this award is to encourage his work in doing just that. So you can tell, this is a guy that's in it for the money. So I'll start with the check. Also a certificate and a copy of War in Heaven. Congratulations to you, Kevin, and to your parents, who I also understand are in the audience. I truly hope you fulfill your highest dreams and carry on the work. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, everyone. I am so deeply honored to be the inaugural recipient of the Craig Eisendrath Award for Youth Advocacy and Nuclear Disarmament. So much so that when I was first informed that I was chosen as the first ever recipient, I was as close to speechless as I think I probably have ever been. However, that speechlessness did not last very long, because as part of that, I was given an opportunity, and I was excited at that opportunity, to express my gratitude to all of you here tonight. But to paraphrase the Archbishop Sir Desmond Tutu, if you give a microphone and a captive audience to a young disarmament advocate who enjoys public speaking, and then ask him to be brief, well, I'll try. I am not. I will be brief, somewhat. I would like to sincerely thank the entire Eisendrath family, the Project for Nuclear Awareness and Physicians for Social Responsibility, for finding me worthy enough to receive this great honor, as well as WHYY for their support and co-sponsorship of the event, Dr. Caldecott for her years of service, my dear Professor Jim Ranney, who nominated me for this award, and of course, my supporting family who is in the audience right now. However, I think that I owe much more than a thank you to Mr. Craig Eisendrath. Ladies and gentlemen, it was 71 years ago in 1951 that then Governor Adlai Stevenson gave the commemorating speech addressing Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And he did this by reflecting on the crucial concept of collective security, and that remains as relevant today as it has ever been. Mr. Stevenson, who served as President Kennedy's ambassador to the United Nations, said that the struggle for human liberty is a struggle that must be refought by every generation, and that democracy is threatened not alone by hostile ideologies abroad, but by fear, greed, indifference, and intolerance here at home. There is no greater threat to human liberty than the continued existence of nuclear weapons. No longer can the masses of men, as Henry David Thoreau once said, lead lives of quiet desperation. No longer can we be complacent. We must be champions, tireless champions of our cause, and the best advocates possible in order to save the ability of succeeding generations to continue to fight for their right for human liberty. Abraham Lincoln and Adlai Stevenson recognized this. I now recognize this. And Mr. Eisendrath certainly has been aware of this for many, many years. The myriad of noble accomplishments of Dr. Eisendrath toward nuclear disarmament are both incredibly humbling and greatly inspiring. I pledge to all of you here tonight that I will do my absolute best to live up to the expectations and legacy embodied by this award. Though I stand here a humble recipient tonight, Mr. Eisendrath, the true honor lies with you. And for that, we all thank you.
Kevin, thank you very much. Thank Kevin's family for being here and for being such a worthy recipient and a good orator. So we'll look forward for you not only in the disarmament world, but on the stage. What's going to happen next is that Kevin's going to moderate questions to Trudy and Helen. So I'm going to invite them to come back up on the stage, and then we have the Q&A moment that you've all been waiting for. As they come to the stage, and there's one person that needs absolute special recognition, and that is Nalat Fanet, who is on the PSR staff. Nalat, where are you? She is the glue that has kept this all together and kept us all together that are working with her. So I really appreciate her efforts, and she has learned one major trait, and particularly exhibited this evening, flexibility. So, at any rate, thanks so much, Nalat. So, moving right along. Kevin, are you going to come up and ask some questions? You got your handful.
And I was asked to remind everybody that there are cards on the tables, and if you think of any questions that come up during the course of this question and answer, please feel free to write them down, raise your hand, and somebody will come by and pick them up and bring them to me. The first question is, how can we empower youth to rise from their disconnection from nuclear issues and get involved in this campaign?
Education. You're not learning it at school, you're not learning it at college, you're not learning it at university. In the 80s, we had courses on nuclear weapons and armament and peace, and the medical schools all had curricula on the medical consequences of nuclear war and nuclear power. But that's gone by the wayside, because when the Cold War ended, we all thought, thank God it's over. And unfortunately, then we got William Jefferson Clinton, who had smoked some dope, and he didn't inhale, and he didn't go to Vietnam, and he didn't have the courage to take the opportunity that we had created, where 80% of Americans supported getting rid of nuclear weapons, and he could have flown in Air Force One over to Yeltsin, who was totally compliant. And he had everyone behind him here to say, Boris, we're going to abolish nuclear weapons in 5 years. He didn't take that opportunity. So if we're blown up tonight or tomorrow, and I've got 7 grandchildren. That is his legacy. You educate. Therefore, you've got to get the curricula, and your idea is excellent, Matt, is to get curricula in all the colleges sponsored by Project for Nuclear Awareness, and he's got a good idea that would really work.
On that topic, in addition to within the schools themselves, one question states that it's been noted that America is attempting to lead nuclear disarmament, yet is the only country to ever use a nuclear weapon. So in addition to education, and possibly including that, where and how can young activists start to engage the military-industrial complex to help provoke and affect change?
Well, sorry. You've got to use your imagination. And, you know, having rallies doesn't work anymore. Petitions don't work anymore. But I have tremendous confidence in the creativity of youth. And they're courageous. And all revolutions are led by youth. The Russian Revolution and all the rest. And so, therefore, it comes back to what Jefferson said, an informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. If the youth are not educated, and they're all on their Twitter and their Facebooks and stuff, they're not getting the education that is required. So I think that PNA could lead the education in the colleges in Philadelphia and spread throughout the country, and I'm sure you could get the funding for that, and turn the youth on, and then I'm sure that with your creativity and wisdom and courage that you'll lead the revolution that we actually had in the 80s. We created the second American Revolution in the 80s, where when I came, almost every American said it's better to be dead than red in 1978. And I said, what do you mean? They said, we don't want to be communists. And I thought, this is a collective psychosis. And I said, well, what about the pygmies in Africa? They'll be blown up in a nuclear war too. And they said, yeah, they don't want to be communists either. So we started educating people about the medical effects of nuclear war and got 23,000 doctors, and we're on television all the time. In 5 years, 80% of Americans were opposed to nuclear war. I was even asked to the National Conference on Morticians to address them. And I said, why do you want me to talk to you? And they said, we don't want to have to embalm radioactive bodies. And I said, don't worry, you'll be one yourself. So that was a peaceful, sagacious revolution, Gandhian-like, and it was the second American Revolution. It was really stupendous. Do it again. Do it again. Okay?
Well, we speak of the media and their role within the whole concept and problems and issues. So this question goes to both panelists, in that, what do you think and how do you think the media should and could do to persuade the majority of the population to think that nuclear weapons is in fact a serious matter, as we all know that it is?
The media, quote unquote, no longer exists. From my perspective, sadly, and it's only going to get worse. So I don't think one can expect anything from the media. To carry on a campaign is mainly the venue of editorial pages. But the problem is that print media is losing circulation, as you all know, and young people don't read it. And if they read it, online perhaps, they don't read editorial pages. So it seems to me that if there were going to be a campaign that might garner attention, it's going to have to be something that's waged online. It's going to have to be something where bright, creative young people figure out how to make this an issue on Facebook, on Twitter, on websites that are created especially for such a campaign, and figure out the organizing tools and how to make the issue go viral on campuses. Now, how you do that without an immediate crisis, that's your challenge, but I mean, there's a subliminal crisis, but it's not in your face every day. But I think that occasional editorials are not going to make the difference, nor are occasional op-ed pieces. it's going to have to be something more creative that uses new media and figures out how to make that effective.
So I've got an idea, and I'll give you an example. Remember Y2K and the rollover? And I was really worried about the fact that there could be nuclear meltdowns and actually nuclear war. And I was in the White House talking to the person in charge of Y2K, and he put me on the conference call with the Pentagon, and they said, "Don't worry, it's all fine." Well, I read in the New York Times some time later that actually over the rollover, they were changing their early warning computers, and they lost them for 8 months over the rollover. So I was at a conference at the Herbst Lecture Theatre where the UN Charter was signed, and Gorbachev was in the other room talking, and there was a big conference, and there was this guy called Patch Adams, you know, the clown doctor? And he was worried, and the media were not interested in Y2K at all. So he went to the mic and he said, "Look, I've been telling Helen since August we should take our clothes off and walk across America." And I thought, "Oh God, Patch, you know." So I went to the mic and I said, "Hands up those who'll take their clothes off." The whole room went up, like 100 people. And one woman yelled and she said, "I'll ring the media." So we went out to the foyer, it was all red velvet, and I thought, "Oh God," you know. So I took my clothes off, but I kept my scarf on to cover the naughty bits, and I had my pearls on. Patch got everything off, and in a flash, 50 or 70 people were stark naked. And so I thought, what do we do now? So we led them out onto Van Ness, and we started walking down the street naked. And one person started shouting, "Nudes, not nukes. Nudes, not nukes." And guys would pull up in their car and stand and clap us, and they didn't even know what we were doing or why. And we came back afterwards, it was pretty cold, and no one wanted to get their clothes on. And they were all standing around in knots talking. I've never seen such exhilarated, excited, courageous people, because what they did was benign. And what I realised was every human body, as a doctor, is beautiful. Fat ones, skinny ones, thin ones, tall ones. And that we are so vulnerable to the nuclear threat. Our body, and only we doctors know, because patients tell us their darkest secrets and they undress themselves, and it's such a sacred profession. And I realised how vulnerable we are, and what an incredible thing that was. Well, suffice it to say we got in the New York Times because the media's interested in the naughty bits, you know, not issues like this. But what I'm saying to you, love, is that, you know, you could take, 10,000 kids from colleges, surround the Congress, and during the summer, don't be too cold, at a certain point take all your clothes off, which is not illegal, except I suppose some people might think, but it's not. The human body is beautiful, and say, look how vulnerable we are to the nuclear threat, and nudes, not nukes, or whatever. I thought of one other thing called Babies Against the Pentagon. When the Senate's debating nuclear weapons, you're